The Saudis should not be treated as guilty until proven innocent, said President Trump last night about the apparent murder of Jamal Khashoggi on their diplomatic premises in Istanbul. The Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman knew nothing about it, according to Mr. Trump, whose Secretary of State Mike Pompeo meets Turkish officials in Ankara today. President Erdogan himself has suggested that toxic materials inside the Saudi consulate had been painted over. Well, Egemen Bağış is a close ally of the president. He's a former Europe minister for Turkey's governing AK party and on the line now. Good morning, Mr. Bağış.
Good morning.
What do you think of these comments from President Trump saying that blaming Riyadh before all the facts are known is another case of guilty until proven innocent?
Well, he might have a point, but one thing is for sure, this needs to be clarified. We have to find out what happened to Mr. Kaşıkçı. Diplomatic grounds are not places to interrogate people. They are places to help your citizens with their needed documentation. And all we know for fact is he entered the premises and we have no evidence of him leaving. The Saudis have to come up with an explanation, and we have to find out where this issue goes to. If he was actually killed, who gave the instructions? And yes, bilateral relations are important, economic relations are important, but they are not more important than any human life.
Are the Saudis cooperating with Turkish investigators?
At times.
What do you mean at times? What are they not doing?
Well, as of yesterday, their consul general disappeared. Then we find out that he flew to Saudi Arabia. Turkish authorities were supposed to get in touch with their Saudi colleagues and they didn't respond to the calls. Yes, the two teams, investigative teams, the Saudi and the Turkish teams, entered the consul general office together. And then as they were going to investigate the residence of the consul general left the country, as we find out, and we did not have any access to them. So I think the Saudis are trying to consult with their capital. Their consul general has been pulled to inform his superiors. But what's more important is the U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, was recently in Riyadh. He is expected to land in Ankara shortly, where he will meet President of Turkey at the airport before our president leaves for Moldova.
Yes, and the suggestion...
So depending on what kind of news he is bringing, and if the Saudis are going to assume any responsibility for this, or who within the Saudi establishment is responsible for this, is yet to be clarified.
Well, let's just assume that what he is going to say is in line with what President Trump is saying publicly, which is suggesting that rogue killers might have been responsible for Mr. Khashoggi's death. Now, could you believe that? Would Turkey accept that as an explanation?
If these rogue killers admit to their crime and they accept to be prosecuted and sentenced in Turkey, that could be of some credibility. But if it's just a statement, no matter who makes a statement, it has to be backed with evidence and procedures to follow up on that evidence.
Rogue killers who have the full reign across, diplomatic premises of their country, access to their cars, etc. You think that is potentially a credible explanation?
As I said, if those rogue killers publicly admit to wrongdoing and accept to be prosecuted, not in Saudi Arabia, but in Turkey, and then be sentenced in Turkey, that's totally different. But I don't foresee that happening. But let us see the results of the investigation.
Okay. But I think there will be a choice, won't there, for President Erdogan sooner or later, which is how far he wants to take it. If all the fingers of blame are pointing at the Saudis and some of the details are emerging are truly horrifying, how far does he really want to take this? And will he be seeking some kind of international consensus, as Britain did, for example, in the aftermath of the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter?
Well, I'm sure he would seek international consensus. We're talking of a president who himself was imprisoned for reciting a poem. So he's very much into human rights. He's
although he's jailed plenty of journalists, hasn't he?
Not he himself, but after the coup attempt that lost 250 lives, a lot of journalists who were also involved with the terrorist organization have been detained and prosecuted in Turkey. But this is not Erdogan doing. This is the law, and this is the results of the crimes that were attributed to those individuals. However, we have to find out what really happened and who really is responsible in the Saudi Consul General in Istanbul. And we have to find out why this was done in Istanbul, because the journalist in question, Mr. Kaşıkçı, did not live in Istanbul. He lived in Washington, D.C. He was a writer for Washington Post.
Yes.
He could have done the procedures at the Saudi embassy in Washington, D.C. He even tried to do it in London at the Saudi embassy, but he was always referred to, he was told to go to Istanbul.
Egemen
so
Bağış.
why Istanbul is we have to find out.
Thank you very much indeed, Egemen Bağış.